Well, hi everyone. It's Antonio Galloni. I'm sitting here at Alma Rosa with Richard Sanford. Richard, what a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
We met, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. But one of the reasons I wanted to stop by is just to thank you for all of the help that you provided with the Rita Hills map. And we talked a lot about it. And you said, when you come, I'll open my first ever Pinot Noir. And so here it is, 1976. And I have to say, it's pretty emotional experience to taste this wine from Sanford and Benedict Ranch at this age. It's still beautiful. You can see in the color, it's got gorgeous inner perfume and sweetness, but
That sort of brickiness is really
a little bit of
telling,
brickiness.
isn't
But
it?
man, to take us back to this time, I mean, tell us about this wine. How did you make this?
Well, there was such innocence those days that it's a long story how I got there. But this was the very first vineyard I planted in 1971 with my partner, Mr. Benedict. And I had a Volnay, and I became fascinated with Burgundy wines and decided that's what I would pursue. I wanted to be in farming, to be in nature. That was my approach. So I looked around for the right place to plant a vineyard. And I had studied geography at UC Berkeley and became interested in the geography along the West Coast. And moreover, this transverse mountain range here in Santa Barbara spoke to me because the mountains run east and west, open to the sea. And we have this beautiful winds coming off the ocean, and that moderates the climate. So it's about a degree a mile difference. And so when I proposed this, everyone said, farmers said grapes won't grow here, never have. And the people said, Santa Barbara, that's too far south, it's going to be too warm.
Including some pretty illustrious people at UC Davis, as I recall.
Everybody said this is a stupid idea. And I went and shopped around to try and find some investors. And because all of our involvement was sweat equity. So I finally found some investors that they were on the wine committee at the Los Angeles Country Club. And they thought, I think that they saw more of the enthusiasm that I had for being involved, that they invested in an enterprise. I found a place to plant the vineyard, negotiated with the owner, and he said it'll be $470,000. And I said, I had no concept of that value, but I was able to negotiate a lease while we planted the vineyard, and all of our equity was sweat equity. So I was healing after the Vietnam War and coming back to be in nature. And it was a huge spiritual journey for me to be involved in physically planting the vineyard, driving on the tractor, farming the vineyard, and finally, this is the fruition. And I'm so excited to taste it today. I haven't had it for years, but it's holding up beautifully.
It's holding up beautifully. And so, like, if I look at our map, I mean, Sanford and Benedict is very centrally located, actually, within this area. I mean, it's obvious, it's easy to see that now, but did you recognize immediately that place, it was, yes, it's west, close to the ocean, but it's not so far west that it's too hostile, and it's cooler than the eastern parts of what are now this AVA. Did you know that it was sort of in the middle there?
There was no middle.
Yeah, there was no middle. So how did you know? It's such a perfect place, and also this amphitheater behind it.
Well, you know what? With my background in geology and geography, I recognize this. Those days, I was more interested in drainage.
Okay.
Planting a vineyard in a well-drained soil, as in Burgundy. Of course, that's limestone related. But here was the place. First of all, it was finding the right climate, and this transverse mountain range goes from San Luis Obispo down to this valley, the east-west orientation. The Etna Valley in San Luis, Santa Maria Valley. And I chose this place, first of all, the location for the climate, and then began to look around in a banded climate a couple of miles wide in all these different valleys to find the right spot. And here at the Sanford Benedict was a old landslide. It had collapsed into the river. And here we have a lot of, this is the Monterey Formation. It's a Miocene deposit 39 years ago. So you have all these different layers. And an interesting layer in this is the chert layer. There's CHERT, it's a hard angular stone. It's silica. This is all silica based, it's not limestone. And it is from all these little diatoms that have collapsed over centuries. And this was laid down in horizontal layers. And when it was undercut by the river, it collapsed. So it's really mixed up with all these little chert stones, giving very well drained soils. And that became the place that I identified as mine to be in. And there was no Santa Rita Hills.
Yeah.
And the farmer said it's not going to work. But I had different views, and we were sort of persona non grata in the agricultural community because it was a little wild time. That was the, I guess there was a hippie culture, but we were sort of back to the earth kinds of people. And lucky for me, the ranch had never been electrified. It was owned by a Portuguese family. They were farming garbanzo beans there. This whole region was populated by people from the Azores. And so I arrived, and no electricity, outhouse. And so it was really a wonderful time for me personally to have my own spiritual journey. And it has become that way for me. The whole involvement in wine is that way for me.
It's amazing. So but the first vineyards that you planted at Sanford and Benedict was not Pinot Noir, right? You had budded over some Bordeaux varieties that were more popular at the time.
Those days, there wasn't any interest in Pinot Noir, and everybody was planting. Boy, this is really delicious wine.
I'm glad you like it. I've only had it once, and I may never have it again.
It's funny
It is
because sometimes
delicious.
you taste a wine that's old and it's not good. So this is very drinkable.
Oh, yes,
Um,
it's quite drinkable.
so people were planting Bordeaux varieties and Cabernet, and there was an experimental vineyard planted in the Tepesquei Mesa where I first got my cuttings. I learned that I could get a cutting and pay 10 cents and then plant it in the ground, and in 4 months, it's worth $100 a cutting because I could grow it into a rooting. So we had a very positive books, to show our investors that we grew our own cuttings to plant the vineyard. But the only grape varieties available were the Cabernet and some Chardonnay and Riesling of all things. So there was a lot of Riesling, and it made beautiful wine. We made a cabinet style Riesling, but there wasn't a market for Riesling those days. And so we found that up in Livermore Valley, Carl Winty was a great viticultural person, and he had a nursery. And those days, we had him grow some rootings of the Mount Eden clone that Paul Masson brought to this country originally.
Yeah.
And so we planted the Mount Eden and some Napa Gamay. The idea is to have it ready early, and we could market it like a Beaujolais style wine. Turned out we just called it Pinot Noir and made red wine from it and just mixed it all up together. It's a very vertical growing grapevine. But when we had our very first wine in 1975, it was significant. So we decided to convert a barn in the property to the winery. And I found some American white oak that was quarter sawn. And I was able to build these beautiful open-top fermenters in my friend's hot tub factory in Santa Barbara. Because,
So you built those open tops yourself?
yeah, I
They're
built
beautiful.
them. Aren't they beautiful?
Yeah, they're still beautiful.
They're still operational,
Wow.
and they could be. They're not. I mean, they're more for show.
I didn't realize that you made those.
I made them with my own hands.
Jeez.
We did everything with our own hands those days, because that was part of the deal, to preserve our equity. We had to do that. Then finally, well, I'll always remember that the word came out in 1976. Robert Lawrence Balzer, you remember the writer?
Yeah.
He wrote the wonderful book on California wine. And there was a guy named Leonce Picot from the Down Under restaurant and visiting him. And he heard about this Pinot Noir. The word was traveling. And so he drove right up, and he was stunned at the quality of this wine. And he wrote in his wine publication, Robert Lawrence Balzer's Private Guide to Food and Wine, and said, I'll send you a copy. It's Grand Cru in a Lompoc barn. And that really sort of put us on the map. And then I was invited to go to the California Vintage Wine Society was active those days. And I was invited to go to a big tasting at the California Club in Los Angeles. And it's a wonderful old-timey men's club. And it was a very intimidating experience of being in my 30s to go into this chandeliered room with white tablecloths and all these gentlemen harumph, with ties and sparkly glassware. And so it was all very quiet and hushed, and they poured the wine, and all of a sudden someone said, "Son of a bitch." Finally, a Burgundy from California.
What vintage was that?
1976.
1976. Okay, so this one. Okay, this is very wine.
And
Wow.
that was Fernando Courtright, who owned the Beverly Hills Hotel.
Wow.
And so that really, I thought, when he said "son of a bitch," I thought, oh, they don't like my wine. But I soon found it was a term of endearment, that they loved it.
Quite a term of endearment. That's great.
So then people started recognizing that as the area grew, the original appellations were vast.
Yeah.
Santa Ynez Valley went from Lompoc to Lake Cachuma.
That's right.
And it wasn't really meaningful, wasn't definitive. So there became another appellation, Santa Maria. And more of the wine writers were recognizing Santa Maria as a place for Pinot Noir. Santa Ynez is a place for Cabernet. And I was offended by that because we were growing Pinot Noir out here, out in the western end. So I got all of our growers together, and we decided that we needed to have a new appellation. And at that time, we had our tasting room right here on this ranch. We had left Sanford and Benedict and started Sanford Winery. So we had our meetings and got together and went around and chose the actual hilltops, which would define the Santa Rita Hills.
Yeah.
The challenge was the eastern and western ends. And so it became the 200-foot level into the Lompoc Valley. And this was the end that the climate begins to change from here, going into what we were talking about, the Buellton Flats.
Yeah.
So we went through the process and made an application and was actually granted. So that became the Santa Rita Hills appellation.
Well, that's a fascinating history. This wine we were talking about before, you fermented it in those open top wood vats that you made. You said about 50% stems.
Yeah, the whole idea was to create a winery typical of Burgundy. And you remember Eunice Freed?
Yeah.
She was wonderful about Burgundy, and she talked a lot about the way to make wine in Burgundy. And so the whole winery was all hand done. This was corked with a hand corker and an old German corker. But everything was done gently. And my observation is that Pinot Noir needs delicate handling.
Yeah.
You don't pump it around. This has never been pumped. It's all gravity flow.
Wow. Well, this wine keeps getting better and better with air. I've almost finished mine. You need to catch up. But I think that's a great introduction. And thank you.
You're
thank
welcome.
you so much, Richard, for opening
Thanks
this.
for coming.
It's our great pleasure. Thank
you.
Cheers, everyone.
Remember,
Yeah.
Billy, I considered this a whole new appellation right here. And this guy Pence gerrymandered our appellation to include himself. And I said he's the westernmost end of the Buellton Flats, which went from Buellton all the way to Solvang. It's a beautiful map, Antonio.
Hi, it's Antonio Galloni. I'm back with Richard Sanford. We have refreshed our glasses
Yeah, we have some beautiful
with some fresh
Pinot
pours. We're ready for the second part of the conversation. I gotta tell you, Richard, this wine is intoxicatingly beautiful. You know, with these older wines, you're welcome. You know, so often with these older wines, you open them and it's like, you know, they're beautiful for like the first few minutes and then they just sort of fall apart.
This is developing.
This is getting better and better. Yeah, it's fantastic. So let's continue some of the history because maybe a lot of people don't know that you've had you've played a pivotal role in developing not just Sanford and Benedict, the vineyard that still has your name, but a lot of other properties. So what happened? What's the history of Sanford and Benedict and how your career transitions into some of these other properties?
You know, I reflect on all that now, and I'm grateful every day to have had such a rich history of activity in the wine trade. And we've had some great successes and some big challenges along the way because it's an expensive proposition. You know, it's not easy to be in the wine business. And we are, you know, beholden to the banks and to what's happening in the money markets. And I went through a period of 24% interest, and you know, we have to weather these different storms. And so I've made millions and been bankrupt at the same time. Not the same time, but over the course of my history. But I recognize that you just have to get up and keep moving.
Well, that's very good advice for a lot of us in
You
life.
know, just shake it off.
Shake it off. I love it. Okay.
You just have to keep going. Well, you don't have to, but I mean.
Well, that's better than the alternative. Let's put it that way.
There are challenges in life. We all have them, but we just have to make the most of it that we can. And I always think that, gosh, if I had made Sanford and Benedict a great success forever, how boring. I would still be there and not have enriched myself in planting new vineyards. And I've had the opportunity over time to plant over 400 acres of beautiful vineyards in different configurations up and down the valley. And what's fascinating for me in my history is each of my vineyard sites has been about 10 years apart. So I've been able to plant the new vineyards with the new clones as they become available, new selections of clones. And because, you know, in the early days, we did not have clones.
Yeah.
And there were the suitcase clones that people would bring from Burgundy. But and the demand of wine has changed. You know, the wine consumer is fickle. And people like you changed the whole scene.
No. But let's talk about your vineyard. So Sanford and Benedict was the first one, and the second that you developed.
So then, I'll tell you that the Sanford and Benedict Vineyard, I'll never forget when I came home to tell Tekla, this isn't going to work out. Tekla and I became married at Sanford and Benedict. We lived in a house And finally, when I decided I had to separate from my partner, I had a little daughter, and it was really tragic for us. And I returned home in tears and said, it's just not going to work out. So we packed up and went to all of our different investors, and they were sophisticated business people, and they understood that stuff happens. And so I sold out of my interest, and they continued on. And with the proceeds, was able to negotiate the purchase of this beautiful ranch. And it was about 738 acres.
So we're here in Alma, Rosa.
Here at Alma Rosa now. So we planted the Hobbley Vineyard, a little Chardonnay vineyard, half Chardonnay and half an Adian clone of Pinot Noir. But my heart really was down at the Sanford Benedict, which I had put so much emotional commitment to. So I would go down there and check it out every day. And my wife said finally, you just have to let it go. It's become just too much for you. And so finally, after several years of doing this and seeing the vineyard and sort of going into disrepair, and it was sad for me. But so she said, let's just focus on the Sanford brand. And I did. And sure enough, I became really interested in Eastern philosophy and the whole concept of letting go and having it come back. Pretty remarkable that after 10 years, Mr. Benedict did not make a success of the venture. And a gentleman came from England named Robert Atkin. He was looking for a vineyard to buy, and he said, I have just the right place for you. And he became an investor in Sanford Winery. We had left Sanford and Benedict we started in 71. We left in 81 was our first vintage of Sanford. And then Mr. Atkin came along. He purchased Sanford and Benedict. I became the manager for the next 30 years and used all the grapes. So I had my cake and I was eating it too. Then I became aware of the neighboring vineyard, the La Rinconada. And it had been in a ranching family, and the sisters were threatening a partition action because one sister's children, deceased sister's children, wanted to get out. Okay. So I became partners with 3 other sisters and able to then work with them to create value that I would be able to give them a percentage interest in the increase in value of the ranch as I planted vineyards and developed that. And so we went on our merry way doing that. All the while, our tasting room was here on this ranch, on the Hobbley Ranch.
For the Sanford Winery.
Sanford Winery.
Yeah, it's a little confusing, but it
is confusing.
All these properties are, I don't know how you could live here and not go see the vineyard that you planted when it's just, people may not realize, but it's just a few gates away.
Yeah.
It's right around the corner.
It's not down 4 miles from here.
It's nothing really in a car, so it's 5 minutes away. But so you had the Sanford tasting room here at Hobbley.
Hobbley Vineyard here with the Sanford tasting room, Sanford and Benedict Vineyard, and the La Rinconada next door, each of them about 100 acres. And then I became aware of the Encantada, which was a beautiful ridge just to the west of the Rinconada Ranch. And I thought, this is the perfect place. I've learned over time, Antonio, that the more clay soils give more depth to the Pinot Noir, and this was very clay-like. And so I decided that we wanted to continue to plant Pinot Noir in that place, and a little bit of Pinot Blanc and Pinot Gris. But the bank said, well, why don't we become your partners? Because things were going so great. That was lethal for us. Because, of course, $3 million and this and that. So anyway, we planted that vineyard, and each of them has its own distinction, and I love them all for different reasons. But then, of course, things were going great until the big housing bust in about 2005 or something.
7 and 8.
Yeah,
Started in 7, but it really collapsed.
And that's when we had some big challenges. And the Paterno group came in, and we had to move on. And at that time, we decided we'd start the Alma Rosa winery, because all of our vineyards were producing grapes from the Rancho Santa Rosa. And so all of the grapes for the wines were from Rancho Santa Rosa. The wine's a reflection of the Alma, of the soul of the Rancho. That's where Alma Rosa comes from. So we continued along. It was very challenging because the Sanford tasting room was here. We were living here and trying to negotiate all this. We started a little tasting room in Buellton in the interim because we had to give them a chance to build a tasting room at the ranch. But the whole activity of building the winery, it was made for producing Pinot Noir, and I wanted to create a space without compromise, and I did. And I felt really good about that, and I continue to do. And I have to tell my wife Tekla that to be proud of all of the activities that we have done, because we've done them without compromise. And I'm very happy that over the course of time, for 35 years, all of our vineyards were organically farmed. We were the first certified organic vineyards in Santa Barbara County.
Wow.
And we're moving back in that direction now too. With Alma Rosa, we're signing up for sustainability, and eventually we'll get back to organics, I'm quite sure. That's really the only way to be.
Wow. Well, I've always admired your ability to weather these ups and downs of life. Of course, the great attitude.
What do you do otherwise, you know? And then as I've gotten older and recognized that there are challenges in the business, a gentleman named Bob Zorik came along, was interested in being in the wine business. And lucky for me, we were able to sell Mr. Zorik and his wife Barb the Alma Rosa brand and the ranch. And we're living here on the ranch supporting his endeavor, and he's put a lot of investment into some beautiful new vineyards that I've had the opportunity to plant for him. So it's really been an exciting career for me. And now we get to live in our beautiful house right in the middle of all this. And through COVID, we've been here, and it's just been wonderful for us.
It's a really special place.
It's special, don't you think?
I
You can feel the air.
You can feel the air now as the afternoon is kind of cooling off a little bit. And
It's a
special
marine
place.
air, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got that sort of moisture in it.
I've always loved it here. Well, that's great. Cheers again.
Thank you so
Congratulations. This is
much.
fantastic. This wine keeps getting better and better. I wish everyone could taste it, but it's a real treat. And thanks for your time today, Richard. It's been fantastic. Cheers, everyone.